99% of life is just showing up. 99% of that project is just doing it every day or every month or whatever that is, being consistent and recognizing that in the beginning, sometimes it's going to suck.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Cleve Mesidor, Executive Director of the Blockchain Foundation and founder and managing editor of Butterscotch Media, and one of the most influential voices shaping the future of Web3. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. Number one, Cleve is a powerhouse at the intersection of policy, finance, and technology. A former Obama administration appointee turned Web3 trailblazer, Cleve is driving inclusive innovation across the digital economy. She was recently named a 2024 Inspiring FinTech Female by NYC FinTech Women for her leadership in transforming finance and championing representation. Number two, she brings a rare mix of experience across government, media, and crypto. Cleve started her career at CNN, advised the Blockchain Association on policy, and has spent nearly a decade building bridges between Washington and the crypto world. She's the author of The Clevolution, My Quest for Justice in Politics and Crypto, love that title, and hosts the annual Blockchain Brain Trust Retreat on Martha's Vineyard. And lastly, her leadership in reshaping the national and global conversation on Web3. It's been featured in Time. She's been featured in Time, Bloomberg, and the New York Times. Cleve is a sought-after speaker at events like South by Southwest, CES, Money 2020, and she's taken the DeFi conversation from Abu Dhabi to Amsterdam. Cleve, you have been called many things: a Web3 expert, a Washington insider, White House appointee, inspiring leader, powerful author. Well, today, we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you. And what an amazing intro. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me and humbled by your amazing intro.
I mean, I'm just so thrilled that we have you because, of course, chief influencers are all about, how do you take complex information, break it down, break through the noise. And so that is something you do very well. But we also really haven't had a conversation yet on Chief Influencer about Web3, crypto, Bitcoin. And I'm excited to learn and for our audience to learn about that as we walk through your influencer journey. And I thought maybe I'd start by going back to your time in the Obama administration. That's when you first learned about Bitcoin. And that moment really set you on a path to becoming now one of the most influential voices in Web3. So what drew you in, and what was the aha moment that made you leave politics to pursue what's really a new frontier?
Oh my God, what a journey it has been. So obviously, before serving in the Obama administration as an appointee, I worked in Congress. I worked for Barbara Lee and Betty McCollum. But being director of public affairs for the Economic Development Administration at the Department of Commerce really put me on this trajectory, focus on entrepreneurship, focus on innovation, and how they can impact economic growth. And at the time during the Obama administration, that was advanced manufacturing. So when we had to create jobs, we looked to innovation, we looked to entrepreneurship. And shortly after that, so while still serving in the Obama administration, a friend reached out in 2013 and asked me to help with a press release for his Bitcoin project. I had never heard of a Bitcoin or what that was. I did the research, helped with the press release, and then all of a sudden it was everywhere. And when I became a bit disillusioned about politics and our capacity to make meaningful change, as I learned more about blockchain technology that fuels Bitcoin, I realized that this may be a transformation that can actually impact change when I left politics in 2016, moved back to New York City in 2017, I was met with this robust crypto ecosystem in 2017 in New York City and jumped right in, fell in love with Ethereum, decided to become a founder, build a project on Ethereum. And then, my background in public policy was needed. And it drew me back to Washington, to my roots, because the conversation around what is the appropriate policy framework for this space came to a head. And at the time in 2017, 2018, there are a few of us who actually, had a background in Washington politics, but also understood how crypto works. So, since the end of 2018, I've been looking at the intersection of public policy and crypto, really focusing on increasing access and creating a financial system and a new innovation economy that is accessible to everyone.
And that's a topic I want to dive into in a minute. But one of the things you're sort of exposing just through this intro is folks can develop innovations, in technology, but if they don't understand the public policy side of things, I guess sometimes businesses might even, not realize that's important until they get into it and it's maybe a little too late and they haven't developed that muscle. Then on the other side, folks in public policy are trying to achieve outcomes, make, the world a better place and in their own way, right? That's what it's all about. And sometimes they're not super in touch with what's happening on the business side and the innovations. And so building those bridges, I'm hearing, is so important. And, especially now things move so fast. You have built influence yourself in two very different worlds, as you talked about, right? The structured halls of Washington, D.C., the Capitol and the White House, but also this decentralized ethos of Web3, which is much messier, if I could say, than sort of the structure. But funny to say messier than Washington. Washington feels pretty messy, but, it doesn't have the same hierarchy. And I wonder if you could talk about your approach to influencing in each of those spaces, because you really have to probably shift gears a bit to be able to do that. What lessons do those ecosystems need to learn from one another?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the 1990s, Washington debated the policy framework for the internet, and they had to come up with a framework for an industry that was not yet developed. And technically, the internet was supposed to decentralize us. And we know today it's very important, very vital, but it hasn't. Web 2 has not, been a decentralizing factor, but it's also controlled by a small group, and individuals don't have control over their own data. So, today, once again, deliberating a policy framework for a new industry, but that industry is iterating so quickly where entrepreneurs are struggling to keep up, policymakers are struggling to keep up, small businesses. We see action at the state level, but not enough at the federal level. And, e-commerce businesses, mom and pops are struggling to ask, what does this mean for me? And even now, as Congress, recently passed, stablecoin legislation and market structure is the focus. It is how do we make sure that small businesses, traditional entities understand they have a role to play in this conversation as well? Because crypto's story is still at its infancy and we're still at the starting line. And I love working in the crypto native space, but I think we need more folks and more individuals, more groups at the table as part of the conversation. Because when you think about the commercialization of this space, who will actually make it what it will be? Is it going to be baby boomers? Is it going to be Gen Xers like me? Is it going to be millennials? Is it going to be Gen Z? Is it going to be Gen Alpha? I think more of that creative innovation is going to land with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. But today, Gen Xers like me have a responsibility to create a framework and to make sure we're building bridges, we're bringing different people to the table, we're translating this issue for everyday consumers and professionals and builders so that we can actually, unlike we did for the internet, we can actually forecast and put us on a path to an innovation economy that includes blockchain and cryptocurrency and AI and quantum, but where more people, more generations can participate.
Cleve, let me ask you. I know that you probably have found yourself sitting down across from a, let's say, United States senator who's been in that role a long time, and their staff still prints their emails for them. And you have to sit down and say, here's what Web3 is. What does that conversation sound like? What do you say? How do you describe, you mentioned, Web 2.0, now we're talking about Web 3, but just how do you describe that? Because these are very important, influential people, but, again, I know, and some of them, their team still prints their emails for them. So what's that? What talking points do you use? It's very different from when you're talking to, somebody who's owns Bitcoin.
Oh my goodness. Well, your question makes me think back to COVID when Facebook CEO had to testify before Congress. I don't know, many of your listeners may remember when, that was a big deal. Mark Zuckerberg is there testifying and he's asked a question by a senator, and the senator asks him, how does Facebook make money? And he says, Senator, we sell ads.
Yeah.
But the magnitude of that question was the fact that you don't know how Facebook makes money.
For one of the top companies in the world by market share. Yeah, and they didn't know.
Exactly. So that still resonate in terms of, yeah, there's a huge gap. And it's not ageism, right? It's not just a generational gap, because we have strong champions on Capitol Hill who are older, who understand how crypto works. But the majority of members of Congress struggle to understand how this new technology works, because we're not just disrupting finance, we're disrupting innovation as well. So there has been a barrier. But the good news is we've been, trying to educate, policymakers for almost a decade now. We have, groups like Blockchain Association, which I previously worked for, and we have also groups like Coin Center that has been there, as well as CCI and Digital Chamber and others. And so there are groups there to educate members of Congress. But the challenge is, over the last decade, members of Congress have had a lot of pressing issues to take on. And I know for me, it took me 2.5 years from when I first learned about Bitcoin in 2013 to when I felt comfortable that I understood it. And then they kept changing things, which is one of the reasons I launched my newsletter in 2018. But I would say today, right, in 2025, I don't think the issue is only that we're struggling to educate members of Congress and their staff. I think also people understand how money works on Capitol Hill, and they're comfortable with how money works, despite the fact that it doesn't work for the majority of Americans. A lot of them have if it's not broke, don't fix it. And then you have a disruption, whether it's the technology or the currency, that did not come from, Washington. It didn't come from Wall Street. It came from the fringes of society. So I think there are so many, headwinds trying to, get us to the point where we are talking about the same thing. But again, I know we chatted a bit about this. I think most of your listeners, most people who have teenagers today who are raised on gaming, who understand the Roblox economy, they struggle with how our traditional financial system works. So I think as we're trying to build bridges, get more champions, it's not just about education, it's about trust, but it's also about making sure that, where we understand that 5 different generations have different priorities and have a different stake, and we have to engage and make sure we're meeting everybody's needs.
Yeah.
And baby boomers do not have a perspective that will reflect what Gen Z has. Millennials don't have a perspective that will necessarily reflect what boomers are needing. So how do we create public policy where we can move from 1930s policies that have driven us to date, but also meet the vast, vibrant ecosystem and marketplace that is looking for change on so many levels.
Cleve, you mentioned trust. Trust is such an important, it's the currency, right? When you're trying to influence. When you are a messenger around the power of something that's so new that people may not understand, how do you establish and build trust? What has worked for you to allow you to be so effective at doing that on behalf of Web3, crypto, blockchain, et cetera?
Yeah, when it comes to crypto, I think the best way to build trust is to build relationships. I think one of the reasons that people struggle with people in crypto is I sometimes I wonder if they think we have horns on our heads, right? Because the space is so new and has been so disruptive that people have misconceptions, right? There are a lot of mistruths out there. So for me, it's really about building relationships and starting with the intersectionality of blockchain and cryptocurrency. I'll give your listeners a great example. So when I explain to people what blockchain technology is, I tell them this, that blockchain is simply technology that securely verifies information, facilitates the exchange of value without third parties. That's the tenets of blockchain technology. Securely verifies information, that's the ledger, facilitates the exchange of value, that's cryptocurrencies. Without third parties, that's decentralization. When we make it too complex, you're just like, wait, what? Who's Satoshi? What are these nodes? It's really about helping us go from Web 2 to Web 3 and having applications that actually help us to solve some of the problems within Web 3, right? Decentralized finance is just about the tenets of finance, which are borrowing, lending, and trading, and making them more peer-to-peer, making them, taking so many intermediaries out of the process and enabling a smart contract to make it so that I can give you a loan without needing 5 attorneys and an underwriter and all of these processes. So I find that, building relationships and talking about these technologies and these new protocols and applications in very plain terms is the best way to demystify crypto and to make it seem less spooky, but also to make it seem less sexy. Because at the end of the day, right, we're really talking about a distributed ledger, you know, uh, a new way of looking at of currency, and finally decentralizing, money. And when you think about Bitcoin, right, our North Star, the first cryptocurrency, functions like cash. We love cash, right? Because if I pay you for something with $1, the transaction is over. You're not trailing me with my dollar. You've been satisfied. We've completed transaction. It's been reconciled in its finality, and that's what Bitcoin provides. That's been the beauty of that original innovation. And the more we can talk about these things in very, very, very plain speak, people will realize that this is just technology that helps us solve problems. It's not a silver bullet. But oftentimes, that's not what people hear. They hear a lot about, very technical terms when people love to say my data is in the cloud and nobody understands how the cloud works, nor do they want to know how the cloud works. So that's my goal, to get crypto to a place where it's like the cloud. You assume it's there, you don't know how it works, but somehow you accept that it's in the cloud.
Yeah, that was definitely a process as well, right? Getting people comfortable, but most organizations don't have a server in their basement anymore. They realize that, cloud computing has a lot of advantages to that. I want to, we checked out, speeches and interviews and, a lot of the things you've said. And one of the things you've come back to is you framed that the blockchain foundation's mission is around accessibility rather than just adoption of this technology. So what does accessibility look like in practice? And how are you working to lower barriers for underrepresented communities?
Yes, a great question. I say this all the time, that while the industry is focused on adoption, Blockchain Foundation is focused on accessibility, increasing access. And the difference is, at the end of the day, profit, right? Adoption means more consumers, more adopters, more products, rollouts, but for us, it's really about educating people so that they're aware, whether they use it or not. We know that, a lot of small businesses, traditional mom and pops, have to innovate. And they may not be thinking about blockchain today, but they may need to 10 years from now. And we want to educate them. We know that so many folks in environmental groups, healthcare, these areas where they've already seen disruptions, right? How and they're not sure where are the sources to get information, how do they get information? So that's why Blockchain Foundation is really a bridge to public institutions. Where 501c3, we were created at the same time as the Blockchain Association by the same people, but for different functions. So as a 501c3, we can partner with Aspen Institute. We can partner with Consumer Reports. We can partner with local governments, because we can partner with the American Library Association. We can, engage in a way where it's really about focusing on the stakeholders who need to be educated. Blockchain Foundation is a member of the American Library Association. We've exhibited at their conference. Think of librarians. Think of the many people who come in and say, do you have a book on crypto? Think of the librarians who order the books. We're just like, well, what book should I order? Right? And so accessibility means that we're making sure that every group, nurses, because the amount of disruption to healthcare that's happened in the enterprise blockchain space is amazing, mind-blowing. And this is not the crypto native space where it's peer-to-peer. I'm talking about healthcare where Johnson & Johnson has its own blockchain. I'm talking about healthcare where IBM, Oracle, VMware are creating products for companies where it is HIPAA compliant to actually put patient data on blockchain as long as you meet those requirements. And these companies are creating that standard. Think of the nurses, the physicians that want access to information. So for us, it's less about making sure that, crypto becomes a viable industry, but making sure that the people who are searching for information, because the space is so new, and unfortunately, there's good information on YouTube, but there's a lot of misinformation there too, that they have a trusted entity to go to, and that we partner with the entities that they already trust, right? The entities that have these stakeholders where their presidents or their executive director of these nonprofits or these advocacy groups are just like, oh my God, what is this? We say, with the Blockchain Foundation, we can help you with education, and we have industry partners that we can come in who, if the education is about, wallets, we can bring in partners like Ledger and others to do that.
When you mentioned the American Library Association, some folks might think, well, what would librarians know about crypto? But it occurred to me that little paper ledger that we used to have, in library books, before computers, where you would write that you checked it out and the date and the next, then you'd look back, you knew who checked it out before you. That's not too different from the way that the blockchain works, right? So librarians probably get it really quickly.
Exactly. When was it, the Dewey Decimal System? Yeah. The piece about data collection and data sorting, the beauty of blockchain technology is cryptography, right? It's based on math, the oldest ledger in the world, where after one must come two, and after two must come three, and if after three comes six, it's a corrupted file, right?
Yeah.
And so lots to learn about, but lots to, as we're iterating society and really just making sure that we can be competitive in the global economy.
Yeah.
We can continue to compete with societies that are leapfrogging, right? Because think of the adoption we've seen across Latin America or the Caribbean or on the continent of Africa. It's because they didn't have a grid to step over, right? They could actually immediately adopt the technology where all you need to begin is that mobile phone, and it doesn't have to be sexy or sophisticated.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I want to switch gears, Cleve. We've been talking a lot about the Blockchain Foundation. But many people know you because of Butterscotch Media. You've grown a humble MailChimp newsletter to a platform that now reaches more than 10,000 people. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about that and that weekly thought leadership platform and what that journey has taught you about consistency, the power of showing up, and of course, influence.
Oh my God, I love to talk about Butterscotch Media. I know you had Anna Palmer from Punchbowl on, and the vision for Butterscotch Media was actually because of Punchbowl, because of Axios, and because of political. And we know Semaphore has adapted it. It is that whole, taking digital media to a point where you can be niche and focus on a key segment. But you're right. For me, this was a concept in January 2018. I knew I had a network, having come from Washington politics, having worked in various industries, and at that time, MailChimp, if your listserv was under 1,000, under 2,000, it was free. So I said, okay, I created a listserv that was 1,999, just underneath the curve. And I sent that newsletter out weekly, focused on crypto. And today it has grown to over 10,000 subscribers. We also send it out via Substack and LinkedIn and other platforms. But for me, in January 28th, it was about having a conversation with my network, not just keeping them posted on what was going on in the industry, but letting them know, what I was doing in the industry, but making sure I was sharing that crypto is not a monolith. It's a vibrant ecosystem. There are so many communities. Women have a deep bench in crypto. Communities of color have a deep bench in crypto. Developers play a significant role. Entrepreneurs and innovators are the backbone of the industry. And so for me, it was, how do I share information that they're not going to get? And obviously in 2018, we didn't have so many traditional outlets actually covering crypto. And as it evolved over time to 5,000 subscribers to 8,000, I actually realized that I wanted to do more. I wanted to use that political Axios, Punchbowl, Semaphore model. And about a year and a half ago, we launched, we packaged and rebranded as Butterscotch Media to focus narrowly on inclusion in crypto. We know that, for Democrats, they've been slow to, warm to the crypto industry, and that's been around financial inclusion and consumer protection. And having worked in crypto for almost a decade now, over 8 years, and being in the halls of Washington, the people who lobby them are the people who have money to do fly-ins, to be there every week, to hire lobbyists. And we know that the, diverse founders across the ecosystem, the builders, the experts who are across these vibrant cities, are not necessarily going to be in Washington 2, 3, 4 times a year. So for me, Butterscotch is a way of sharing with staffers, with the industry, with public leaders, what's happening. And I would say a third of our listserv is Capitol Hill email addresses, as well as the industry. And I hear from folks in the industry saying, when I'm looking for founders, it's your newsletter I go to. I actually get emails from staffers saying, hey, I saw this issue on this topic. Do you have any thoughts? Have anyone in the industry provided comment on that? Because I try to focus on things you're not going to get in CoinDesk or in, Reuters, that actually has now created a pathway to cover the industry. Because I think it's so important that we're not creating an industry where we're eclipsing eclipsing the inclusive ecosystem that is there. But that is very much responsible for the growth that we've seen as well.
Yeah. You know, I think you're really highlighting the importance of, by being consistent with this platform, people come to you, as a source of information, which is really what thought leadership is about, right? People looking to you for your expertise and your advice and trusting you. We have a lot of folks who have been on the show who have, their personal brands, their organizational brands. There's a lot of stuff they're doing. And folks who are listening are probably thinking about this as well. And it can be a challenge to manage and curate all that content and decide sort of what to do when. Can we get tactical for a second? Can you just share a little bit about how you approach the messaging and the content part of what you do?
Yes, absolutely. Because I'll start by saying it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. I've been doing my newsletter since 2018. It comes out every Monday. It always has. And since 2018, I've counted. I think I've missed only 6 Mondays when there was a reason not to do it. But I can tell your subscribers, your listeners, your viewers out there that there's not a weekend that I say, I'm not doing this again. I'm done. I'm a perfectionist. So I pick the stories that are included. I pour through what is out there. What did I miss? So I'm not just going to just pull out what's there. I could look at other newsletters and just copy what's there, but I don't do that. And so the first thing I would say that it's difficult. But I would also say that, for me, it's a way to have a conversation every Monday morning. You're going to wake up and you're going to find Cleve's newsletter. But we also do a podcast. So I agonize with that in terms of who are some of the folks that reflects this whole inclusion in crypto. And then we do events as well. So I find that an editorial calendar helps. The good thing about crypto is there are themes like, in this fall where deliberating policy, and there are key policies like market structure that are top of mind. So I can really say for this month or the next month, we're going to focus a lot on market structure. But the fall is also big conference seasons. I'm speaking at the Money 2020 conference in Vegas, then I'm going straight to California for the SOCAP Global Conference. And so those themes and weaving that in is helpful. So in addition to doing our editorial calendar, I do like to think through all of the equities and assets and responsibilities that I have, whether it's for Butterscotch or for Blockchain Foundation or for conference. And I'm also a Forbes contributor or having to write for Forbes. The editorial calendar helps to actually keep me on message and really focus on what I want to say based on that conversation I want to have with our 10,000 plus subscribers. But it also helps me to not be exhausted, right? Not be, oh my God, what am I going to do for Butterscotch versus Forbes? And to weave in what are those key themes. So if I'm staying on the key themes, I can actually know I'm going to write this for Forbes, but it's still within that same theme. We're going to be focusing on this for Butterscotch within that same
Yeah.
theme. So it's really about telling a story and having a narrative and telling it in different ways. And the good thing is, we've been doing that for a long time, but today we have new tools and we have different ways to deploy. So how do we do that effectively, but also meet the needs of different consumers?
What's one piece of advice that you would give someone getting started, a leader, but maybe they're trying to really ramp up more of their thought leadership, and maybe they're going to launch a newsletter or, try to do something, and they want to maybe take that editorial calendar approach, really be thoughtful and plan their messaging out. What's just one piece of advice about what they should do to get started?
To get started, I would say be consistent. So whatever it is that they want to start, maybe it's a new platform, maybe it is just simply a newsletter, maybe it's a new venture. In some ways, just to be consistent, right? Because it's sort of like getting married. You fall in love with this idea, this vision, and you start implementing it, right? You register it, the legal platform you launched. And then all of a sudden, you got married or you gave birth, right? But nobody tells you what to do after you take the baby home, right? To do what after the honeymoon. Now is the hard part. And that saying that 99% of life is just showing up. 99% of that project is just doing it every day or every month or whatever that is, being consistent and recognizing that in the beginning, sometimes it's going to suck. Sometimes it's going to be like, this is so terrible. Consistency, whether you have 5 consumers or readers or viewers or subscribers or 5 million, they will appreciate consistency. They will hang in there with you. They'll start to give you feedback. They'll become invested. But I think it's, focus on what happens after the honeymoon, after the baby's home, and just being consistent. If you feed the baby every day, they may not like the food, but they'll still grow.
Yeah.
And I think for even long-term success, consistency is still the same problem. I've been doing this newsletter since 2018. It is consistency that has helped me to iterate and figure out how to go deeper. Not being the best newsletter, but more. And I do get feedback from folks, and people do whisper when something goes wrong. And there are some people I've never heard from, but I look at my analytics and they open like within a half hour. They every single week they open. So I stopped looking at my analytics because then I felt responsible because I know some of these people, and some of them I know have gotten even positions and roles because of it. Then I'm just like, oh my God, I'm responsible for making sure that person. So at some point I was so crazy. I was like, oh my God, this is perfect for this person, but it may not be appropriate for the newsletter. So I started pinging people personally and saying, hey, it's not going to be in the newsletter, but it's great for you. You don't need to be at that level, but I think consistency helps you to, develop some of those relationships with, your consumers or your subscribers. But it also helps you to figure out how best to iterate.
I love that. I think consistency, I hear that from so many, it's just don't wait for it to be perfect, because then you may not send anything out for months, have something, and then maybe some of them are shorter, and maybe, it's not perfect and you get feedback, but you learn, but you also develop that muscle by being consistent. And, that's a good reminder to me. We're real consistent with Chief Influencer. It's weekly, but some of the other emails I send out to some groups are, I try to do it monthly, and then I look back and go, oh my gosh, it's been 6 months. And I think you're right. Just really be consistent about that. So I appreciate that advice.
Yes, do something.
Yeah, just do something. We've covered so much ground on crypto and blockchain and Web3, and I know there's so much more that we could cover. But just to close, I want to ask you, Cleve, you've worn a lot of hats as executive, advocate, author. I just would love to know how you personally define influence today, and how has that definition evolved over the course of your career, especially as you've transitioned from being in organizations that have formal hierarchies like CNN and the White House to being in a much more decentralized world today? How has that changed your view of influence?
Yeah. Well, I would say everybody's journey to being an influencer, to being successful, to being whoever you want to be, is different. So it's a different trajectory. So for me, I'm a risk taker, and I've always been ready to say, oh, I'm going to detour. Oh, I'm going to do a hard right. So not everybody's like that. And I think for me, being a risk taker has been great in terms, and also building credibility. I've always had people who, just like in 2013, the friend who reached out and said, hey, can you help with that press release, was also a big player in the crypto space who helped to bring me along, connect me with folks. So I've always been a risk taker, but I've always focused on human capital. I've always known that human capital is just as important as financial capital, and also wanting to, change. The one thing I'll tell people, because at the end of the day, being an influencer is about success, and people always want to say, "How did you do it?" Tell me those three things. And I think it's what we just talked about. Is showing up and being consistent. I'm even consistent at as a listing. The one thing you will know from me is even the newsletter has iterated over. The one thing you know is that I am always going to change things up. But even if you are much more conservative and much more less of a risk taker and pragmatic, like it's for me, whoever you are, all of your dreams will come true. You will become that person you want to become. But I think, you know, to be an influencer in whatever capacity that it is that you want to be, you have to be passionate. I'm passionate about social impact, about making a change in the world. Even my time at CNN was because I thought communications information was the way to change the world. I went into politics because we could do that through politics. I'm in crypto because I want to change the world. Right. So it's not about, you know, how you do it and having a formula. It's about being ready for change and understanding who your values are. And your values will change if today somebody asks you to leave Michigan and go to, Dubai. If you understand your values and your goals, then will play out in Dubai. It doesn't matter where you are geographically. It's just you are that factor. Wherever you are, your dreams are going to follow. Be consistent, be passionate, honor yourself and who you are, and everything will come together. All your dreams will come true, but just be true to yourself. It sounds sappy, but I found that it works. There is no formula. Along the journey, the things happen that help you to become who you need to be.
I love that. And a huge takeaway I have from this conversation today is a reminder that we live in an increasingly decentralized and ever-changing world. And in that environment, one of the things that we can do that's most important, that we have control over, is to be consistent amidst all of that change. Is that right?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head that there is so much change and there's so much emotion around that change, but being consistent, knowing your North Star and staying focused on that, yeah, you'll be fine. You'll weather the storm and you'll get to the other side right where you should be. And sometimes you may wonder, am I lost or is this where I should be? But the universe, you know, the energy that you put out there is going to follow you to just make sure that, even your mistakes, own them. Make mistakes because you chose them to, not because somebody, led you to them. And one day you'll even be you'll regret those mistakes, but you'll own them because they occurred because I did it.
I love that. This has been such a fun conversation and an educational conversation. We have covered a lot of ground because we've talked about blockchain, crypto, Web3, Bitcoin, topics that we really haven't dived into too much before. And one of my favorite pieces was when you sort of broke down for how you might explain to somebody who's not familiar so that you could build trust and build that relationship with them. What is blockchain? Breaking it down into those three easy pieces. And then certainly our conversation has reminded us all that, we're living in a fast changing world. We're using terms that, not too long ago we had never heard of. And now they're in the news every day, and we may not all totally understand them, but we're certainly gaining an understanding as we have to, as the world is moving forward, whether we ask for it to or not. And as we think about how do we navigate that, how do we influence others so that we can achieve those positive outcomes we want? In your case, Cleve, seeing blockchain as really an opportunity for everyone to make the world a better place and making sure that it's accessible. And so as we think about that, what we can control is that we can be consistent and we can show up. And you've done that as I listened to different speeches and read articles, the language that you're using to describe this, being consistent when you show up in these different Money 2020, et cetera, all of these other groups. But also the communication. You launched your own weekly newsletter back in 2018, and you've only missed a few over the last many years. And folks get that consistently. 10,000 plus people get that consistently every week from you. And then they turn to you as an expert. So for those listening who want to build their own influence, whether that's on LinkedIn or with their podcast or their blog, or frankly, even just how they show up in a room with people, I think remembering that there's so much change, but we can be consistent. We can, as you said it, identify what that North Star is and take consistent steps toward it. And as you put it so well, if you do that, your dreams will follow wherever you are. That's such a beautiful sentiment. So Cleve, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Thank you for sharing your story, and congratulations on being a chief influencer. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.